Hi, this is Steve from the Art Box, coming to you today from Mystery Ranch, located in the Unassuming National Monument, Nevada. Today, Kym Martin, the outreach coordinator for Desert Love Native Plants, will be visiting us and talking about native plants in Nevada. Welcome, Kym.
Welcome to the Art Box, your podcast dedicated to exploring the vibrant art scene in Nevada and beyond. Join us as we embark on a journey through galleries, theaters, studios, public lands, and streetscapes, meeting the artists, curators, archaeologists, nature lovers, and cultural influencers who shape our creative community and our world. Whether you're looking for your next cultural adventure, seeking inspiration for your own artistic pursuits, or simply curious about the world of art, tune into the Art Box. Together, let's open up a world of creativity and imagination. Let's dive in.
Dreams, what if the night is about you and me? So lift your head up to the sky.
Hi, Kym.
Hi, Steve.
Thank you for coming all the way down here today.
What an honor. This is beautiful out here.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a better place than to do a podcast by sitting at this table.
I don't think there is.
Yeah. Where they did a lot of negotiation. It's got history. They did negotiation for Unassuming National Monument at this table we're sitting at right now.
Wow. That feels like a true privilege and honor. Yeah, to sit at the same table.
So we met the other day or the other weekend it was the Mojave Desert.
Reciprocity.
I have a hard time saying that.
Yes, I know. That was an incredible gathering of people and very inspiring. I was actually curious how you knew Alex and how you got invited to that event.
I met Alex somewhere. Then he came up to do a Friends of Gold Butte. Well, they still have it, but they used to do it live at the theater there. He came up to do a bird talk.
Cool.
Okay, we would have our, I think, Wednesdays, or I think they're first Wednesday of every month or something. Anyway, so he came up, and my wife had met him, so my wife and I took Alex out to dinner, and my wife wanted to adopt him immediately. She's like, oh, my God, he would be a great son. Then he came and did a podcast with us.
Okay.
And he drove all the way from Vegas up to do the podcast.
Wow.
And we've been friends with Alex ever since, and he's pretty smart.
Yeah.
And he gets people together. He's one of these people that gets people together.
Yeah.
And there was a room full of people, a big room full of people.
A big room full of people, yeah. And the energy at the end of the event was amazing. Everybody was so excited about being in connection and inspired by each other, and so
I got to meet a lot. I got a lot of good podcasts coming out.
I bet you do, yeah.
So, and I'm happy when I get an email back. Hey, I'll be on your podcast.
Yeah.
You're now located at Cactus Joe's, which was around the corner from when my wife and I used to live in Summerlin. So we know Cactus Joe's.
Yes, that's an incredible location too, because it's so close to Red Rock, right? So it's right at the base of Red Rock, and Joe will often say that that's what drew him to it, is that he felt the vortex, the energy there immediately. And so it's a pretty incredible location.
Yeah, it's a great location. So before we get into that, you want to tell us about yourself?
Okay, so, I was telling you earlier, I'm originally from Colorado, kind of made my way to Vegas kind of accidentally because I was kind of directionless. I didn't really know what else to do. I had studied English education in college, and I had done that at Oklahoma, actually a small Baptist university in Oklahoma, Shawnee, Oklahoma, and just didn't know where to go for a job. And Vegas had some good incentives at that time and was desperately in need of teachers. And so I came here kind of with the intention of just getting my feet underneath me and getting some experience and moving on. And
yeah, because who would want to live in Vegas?
Who would want to live in Vegas?
Who would want to stay in Vegas?
Right, exactly. I mean, there's nothing here except the Strip, right?
That's it. That's all.
And that was definitely the impression I had. Plus, it's so hot in the summertime. That's miserable. It grows on you, or it grew on me at least. And so what I think really I started to find with Vegas is that even though what I think our city is not strong in is having like a central location where everybody gathers, right? where I think a lot of cities have that. Like, this is the main center area, and we all kind of come to this. This is where the cultural stuff happens, and this is where all the cool events happen. You know, the Strip doesn't really serve that purpose for us. But what we do have is we're so connected to so many cool places right outside of the city borders. And so within very short drives, you can get to Utah and Arizona and California, and then not to mention the cool things that are just within this, this area, like the Aviquame monuments. And I think that those types of things, then you start to realize, like, oh my gosh, like, Vegas is actually really cool for a lot of reasons, but especially because of its location,
Yeah, location.
Yeah.
We were a great location.
Yeah. So I taught here for in the Clark County School District for 11 years, high school English, and then did some teaching at the college level as well, composition, writing, as well as some teacher education too. That was at UNLV. And what I was feeling kind of in my spirit and my heart at that time, which I think is kind of this ongoing question for my life, is that the structure of the school, the way the school was set up, felt very compartmentalized, and that I was having to kind of compartmentalize my life in turn. So, for example, the classes were 50 minutes. We would have 40 kids in each class. 40 kids in each class, yep. The passing periods were 5 minutes. There were teacher meetings ahead of time or, before school or after school, plus all of the other things. And so, this large chunk of my day was devoted to a very specific task of teaching about 200 kids English that was then compartmentalized into 50-minute periods that were then broken up by 5 minutes of passing. And then I would have to go home and I would have to do my home life at that time. And I was starting to feel very fragmented.
I thought you were going to say you had to go home and do grading.
Well, that too.
Was there even any time for that?
Well, that's the thing, right? So what I would actually end up doing is taking sick days to get my grading done, because it was very difficult otherwise to get any meaningful grading done, right? And when you're teaching writing especially, people's writing evolves based off of meaningful feedback, right? It's like a dialogue that has to happen. But if you have 200 students that you're needing to give meaningful dialogue to in terms of their writing, it's impossible.
You're not helping them at all?
Yes.
Being a writer.
Yes, exactly. And it does become a task, right? Like, it becomes like a checklist in a lot of ways. Like, oh, you didn't do XYZ, do it better next time, right? But it doesn't become, and you're a creative person, like, so you are very familiar with like what the creative process looks like, and a creative process is nonlinear. It can't be developed well by giving a series of like checks of tasks, right? So anyway, I was just starting to feel this kind of like this awareness or recognition in me that the students I loved, I had really incredible students, and I connected to their spirits and their creativity and their hearts. And I mean, the students were amazing, but what wasn't working for me was the structure of how a school day worked and what the expectations within that structure was. And so I started to work, I was able to kind of back off from teaching at the high school level, and I started working part-time at the community college level. And it was the Nevada State College at that time. So it's not a community college, a state college. And that was a little bit better, but I was still feeling like I hadn't quite found, let me put it this way. I was teach to a task. I was hired to teach entry-level students how to do academic writing. And what I was finding is that academic writing was actually not my passion. I was really actually inspired by like what was in a student's heart, and that's what I wanted to see, and how did that heart want to express itself, which might not be through academic writing. And so I was trying to play this game of like, how can I give the students the greatest amount of freedom while also checking off my to-do list? Yeah. You need to learn how to integrate sources. You need to learn how to write it. You know what I mean? Like, and so I was just again feeling this disconnect. And so I
I'm feeling sorry for you, but I'm feeling sorrier for the students who weren't there just to check off a box.
Correct.
Who were really, truly wanted to write.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, who were really, truly wanting to write, or who had been taught that they were bad writers because they had to go through a very specific system that didn't fit them very well. And so then they've internalized this feeling of, oh, I'm not good at this. You know what I mean? Like, I fail, I suck. It's just because it didn't.
They could miss the spark.
Exactly.
The spark could have put them off on a different path.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So
I'm feeling sorry for you.
please don't feel sorry for me. This is all just part of the journey, right? And this is like how we gain awareness, I find, is like, oh, okay, so I'm realizing that this thing that I'm in is not working very well. So what information is that giving me in order to help affect my trajectory and the choices that I'm making in my life? So when I got pregnant with my son, it gave me an opportunity to take a step back. I was fortunate that I didn't have to work during that period of time when he was really young, those first few years. And then he's 6 years old now. So when he started to kind of go back into school, when he was entering into school for the first time, what do I want to be doing now, right? Like, how do I want to be using my own time and resources and energy and bringing resources back to me and my family? And I knew I didn't want to go back to teaching. Like, my heart, it was just very clear that my heart wasn't there anymore. And I started on this real question for myself, which is like, is it possible to have a job or a career where you don't feel like you're sacrificing a part of yourself? Like, is it possible to have a job or career where you feel truly wholehearted, right? And it's kind of this ongoing question still for me. But what kind of has happened is a circuitous path to where I am now. Because while I was taking a break from teaching, I joined my homeowners associations, the boards of my homeowners associations.
This is where the homeowners association comes in.
Yeah.
That can be horrific, but it sounds like you made it good.
Yeah, it's been great for me. And you're right. I have heard horror stories about other HOAs.
I see all the jokes about HOAs.
Yes, I know. And my neighborhood that I live in, I have 3 homeowners associations that I pay into. And so I got on the board of all 3 homeowners associations. Kind of as a hobby, I started just exploring ideas of like permaculture and this kind of more holistic form of gardening. And I really started just becoming interested in like, how do I grow things well in the desert without pouring a ton of resources into them, right? Without having to buy a ton of fertilizer and amending the soil and giving them a ton of water. It was just like this question in my mind, which led me into, permaculture, but then also led me to start exploring the plants that grow around here are native plants, right? Oh, okay, our native plants know what to do in our environment, in our conditions, and they can thrive without a whole lot of additional resources. So as I was exploring kind of these ideas in my own personal life, I started to wonder what it would look like in application in our neighborhood. So our neighborhood is over 20 years old. A lot of our landscape plants are the quote-unquote desert adapted plants, but they're not originally from this area. They're European or African, like that's kind of their main areas where they're from, or even from the East Coast, which, is a totally different environment. And so our neighborhood was kind of in a position where we needed to start to transition. We needed to redo our landscaping. And I kind of brought up the question, well, why don't we start to transition to native plants? The neighborhood I live in is right at the edge of the desert. I'm off of I-11 heading towards Boulder City, and right behind me are the mountains, and we have River Mountain Trail behind us. And so we're right at the edge of the desert. We're this really great location to try to bring in native plants. And I was fortunate that my other board members were like, cool, that sounds like a great idea, but if you want to do it, then you go at it. Like, you be the one to figure it out. And it did start this like really interesting exploration for me of like, okay, who does the native plants around here? And even if we could find native plants, what are the landscape companies who know what to do with native plants? Because the majority don't. They don't install native plants. They don't know how to maintain native plants. It kind of like led me on this path of like, okay, who are these people? Where do I find plants? And I found myself at a small kind of backyard nursery called the Special Projects Nursery. This was a woman, Marilyn Yamamoto. Marilyn had started Special Projects Nursery with a couple of a few other gentlemen. One who's Doyle, and I'm forgetting his last name now, and I've never met Doyle, but his name is infamous in the native plant world. And two other gentlemen, Frank Marino and Bill Redinger, and they all started the Special Projects Nursery out of her backyard. We're pretty successful for a few years. It's not, she wanted to retire, and it's not a retirement project. It's a full-time thing. And so when I met her, she was kind of at the end of this process where she said, if I don't find somebody to take over my native plant business, I'm just going to shut it down because it's too much for somebody, and I want to do retirement things, which I don't blame her. At that point, Doyle had some health issues and he had to step away, and Bill and Frank ended up kind of going in a different direction. So it was just kind of Marilyn at that point. And I started volunteering with her and asking myself the question, well, I know that I am also kind of looking for something. I know that I don't want to go back to teaching, but I do want to find work. So is this the universe speaking to me? Am I supposed to take on this native plant project? Feeling very much like the community needs a good, strong native plant resource. And if Marilyn was the only one doing it, then was I being asked to take it over? And so I volunteered with her for a number of months and really tried to look at it from every single direction in terms of like, what would this actually require of me? What would the investment of time and resources? And ultimately came to the conclusion that I didn't feel like I was the right person to take over the native plant business. And kind of at the end of this period where I was in reflection on it, I had reached out to Norm Schilling, who was also at our gathering, and he has the Schilling Horticulture Group. And I just kind of shared with him, hey, did you know that Marilyn is going to shut down Special Projects? And he said to me, of course, like, was disappointed to hear that, but also said, well, hey, did you know that Bill and Frank, who were originally with Marilyn at the beginning of Special Projects, did you know that Bill and Frank went over to Cactus Joe's and they're growing native plants out at Cactus Joe's? And I said, I had no idea. So I had met Bill before and had visited his yard, which was planted with primarily native plants. And so I had a text message thread with him from 3 years ago or something. Yeah. And I scrolled back through all of my text messages until I found that thread, and I found it, and I gave him a call. And I said, I would love to see what you guys are doing out at Cactus Joe's. And so I went to Cactus Joe's, and Bill gave me the whole tour, and they were doing really incredible work. They had gotten a contract with the SNWA to grow something like 1,300 plants. They had, because you seed more than you think you're going to grow.
Right.
So, but they had been successful in germinating and propagating and hanging on to quite a number. So where the SNWA contract was for something like 1,300 plants, they had like something like 1,800 plants. So they had quite a few plants left over, and they were beautiful. And Bill and Frank were kind of just doing it just for the fun of it because they had done it before. They were looking for another place to just kind of see what they could do. They didn't really have any intention of like becoming like the native plant nursery in town. But when I saw what they were doing and knowing what my personal feeling of need was for my neighborhood and for the community, like the community needs a native plant nursery. I started volunteering with them and then asking them, can I just test your plants at market? And so I would take their plants to little farmers markets around town just to test it. I was just curious, like, what does the community think about this? And I would take them to like a little Tractor Supply farmers market, or I did one out in Boulder City at their community gardens there. And people's response was just like, oh my God, I love these plants, and I can't find them anywhere, and I can't believe you have, XYZ plants. And they would tell me stories about their gardens and planting it. And I just started to have this feeling of like these guys are right on the cusp of something. Like, to use a lot of the same analogies of gardening, like the ground was fertile and that seed had sprouted and germinated, and it just needed now the additional water and attention and love to like make it into something really large and beautiful. And so I brought this to Bill and Frank and Joe. So, Joe was supportive of this kind of what was a hobby. And we can talk about, it's also part of his greater vision of a nonprofit, which would also be a botanical garden. And so he had created a nonprofit called Desert Love in 2019 because
now that's outside of his Outside of Cactus Joe's.
Outside of Cactus Joe's, correct?
Well, I
Yeah.
don't mean outside, but it may have been on premise, but it wasn't the business.
Correct.
Okay.
But it is also outside of Cactus Joe's because
Okay.
he does have some property adjacent to the nursery, and that's where his vision for the
okay.
botanical garden
But
is.
still
yeah.
the
Right.
general vicinity.
Correct. But
Okay.
you're right. It's not the same as the cactus nursery and what he's doing there. And so when Bill and Frank started growing native plants, he said, well, let's just bring you in under the nonprofit of the Desert Love. And then if you guys are successful, then you can grow native plants for the botanical garden. So, it was just kind of this, if it works out, great. When I saw the community's response to native plants just from these few markets, I came to them and I said, I think there are some key things that you could do that would really launch you into being a really strong resource for native plants for the community. And I would love to help you do that. And they said yes. And so that's how I started joining the Desert Love team. And that has been my role ever since, is that of outreach. So where Frank is the one now doing most of the growing process, he's kind of behind the scenes doing, he's in the greenhouse, he's planting the seeds, he's doing the transplanting. I'm the one now who's out there as kind of the microphone and the spokesperson with this goal of getting native plants out to as many people as possible. I think my passion for native plants really comes from this feeling that, well, maybe two places. One, that native plants are very much a part of the solution for a lot of the things that we face in the valley. So our extreme heat, our lack of water, our prolonged drought, our terrible soil. We have no organic material in our soil. The fact that we are seeing an incredible decline in our insect and animal populations. And, you and I were just actually talking about invasive species, right? And so the problems of an invasive species, being kind of out competing a lot of the pieces that are significant for our ecosystems, the animals, the other plants, etc. So native plants and bringing more native plants into our communities, I feel like checks the box for so many of these issues. And I'll give you an example for a number of these. So in my neighborhood after last year, do you remember last year and how we hit 110 and then we got stuck there for the rest of the summer, and we were 110 to 120
It was a hot summer.
In my community, my neighborhood, who has desert adapted plants for the most part, but very few native plants.
Do you have grass?
We do have some grass.
Okay.
Yep. We have some turf. We have a few kind of small park areas, but the majority of it.
Okay, but what do they call it? Xeriscaping or something like that?
That's the primary landscape. So mostly rock and then some bushes and trees kind of throughout. We lost something like 40% of our plant material.
Did you really?
Yes. And our landscaper at that time had said that was what he was seeing all over the valley, that it was like a mass death of plants, because desert adapted doesn't mean that you know what to do at 110 and 120 degree heat, even if you're giving them all the water, right? There are times when a plant is just I've had enough. I'm done. I don't want to fight this fight anymore, right? And so that was what was happening, is we were just filling throughout the valley. We were just filling dumpsters full of plant material. Our native plants are encoded. They know what to do. They've adapted. They have these survival skills of if we get to this period, I won't die. I might look dead, but I'm not dead. And I'll know what to do as soon as the weather cools back down and I get a little bit of rain and whatever. So that's just one example of where I feel like our native plants are just the right choice for our area. And it makes sense to me that we start to bring more native plants into our landscapes. That, is just one of the reasons. But then a second reason is because our native plants support our insects and our animals. And our insects and our animals are, as you know, as your audience knows, are being cut out of their habitats, right? Their habitats are increasingly being destroyed or cut off from each other so that they're fragmented from each other. And so when we can start to bring in more of our native plants into our landscapes, what we do is we create the conditions to support these animals and these insects that are otherwise cut off from what they need. So a lot of our plants have adapted alongside our insects and our animals, and so they need each other to survive.
What was 6-year-old Kym doing? You weren't coming home with seeds in your pockets then, were you?
No.
You weren't the...
I wasn't. That's such an interesting question. I don't remember being that interested in gardening or anything, but I was, running around with my shoes off and climbing trees and all of that. So I think that as a 6-year-old, I loved being outside, even if I wasn't necessarily into like the plants themselves as much. There was still kind of that connection to being outside, to being in nature.
So you were learning and you were becoming what you are now.
Yeah, but maybe without as much like awareness or intention. Yeah. Yeah,
well, you were only 6 years old.
Right. Well,
you weren't thinking about native plants.
I know. It's so funny though, but because I have these conversations. My son is 6, and so because this is my world, these are the conversations I have with him. And so, for example, this morning, he and I, it's a beautiful day here. We've had the rain, so it's cool. It's unusually cool. It's beautiful. So my son and I this morning went for a walk just to enjoy this weather before I came here, and I love it because he's like, oh, let's go take a look at the desert willow and let's go see what the bees are doing on the desert willow. And then we were watching the bees and he said, Mom, I think that's a native bee right there. And I watched. I said, no, babe, I think that's a honeybee. He said, no, that one right there, the little gray one. I think it's a sweat bee. So he's 6 years old and
great?
He is picking up on these things. But it's because, since this is my world, those are the conversations I'm having with him. That was not me as a 6-year-old, right? Those were not the conversations that my mom was having with me or anything. So any connection that I had to nature at that point, I think, was just the little kid who loves running outside in her bare feet, rolling down a hill, a grassy hill or something like that. Yeah.
Because, we get some guests who are artists and they're like, oh, yes, I was drawing and, when I was 6 years old and my mom was putting it up on the refrigerator and I knew I was going to be an artist when I was 6 years old.
Right.
So you didn't know you were going to be a horticulturalist.
No.
When you were 6.
I didn't know that I was going to be this where I am right now until it happened to me a few months ago, honestly. And that's when I started with Desert Love, was in January.
Oh, was it? Okay.
So it's very recent. And it does feel like the path here has been circuitous, right? It hasn't been a clear step-by-step path to where I am now.
Yeah, well, a lot of times you have to make your own way.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to get with other people because they were probably crying out for someone of your skills.
Well, and I think that's, Joe has a belief that has served him really well, which is that the person we need will come through this door. Whoever it is that we need will arrive. And it has been very true for him. And I think that there was, a match, right? They had a need and I had a need. They had, I don't know, it wasn't quite a business yet at that point, but it matched my skill set. And so these things were kind of like puzzle pieces that ended up fitting together. And how, the universal forces orchestrated all of that coming together, that's part of the mystery that we live in, right? And we each have our stories of like synchronicities and coincidences where we look back and we're like, how did that happen? But that seems to be part of this story. Yeah. Yeah,
there's all these little things that happened. After talking with Alan the other day, I just was going back through my life, and if this had happened, I wouldn't be here right now. Right. What would I be doing? Yeah, it's just these little things happen. Yeah. So do you have a favorite native plant?
That's a really good question.
Will the other ones get jealous if you tell me?
It's kind of
like... Because they will probably hear.
I think it's kind of like your children. Like, how do you choose a favorite child, right? But there are some that I just do adore. Like, the globe mallow is such an iconic plant and so important to our desert ecosystem. So I would say that one has a really special place in my heart, the globe mallow. When I say these, do you know which ones I'm talking about? Okay.
Was it 2-3 years ago? It was just an amazing globe mallow everywhere. Basin and Range National Monument, there was miles and miles of orange.
Wow.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And then the next year?
Nothing. I know. And you're like, what were the conditions that triggered that?
The globe mallows you still see around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But not just that, whether it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, it was just, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Even
amazing.
even up more towards Utah, even the I-15 median was full of them.
Wow.
So I don't know what
It
happened.
was something. It was just like the perfect conditions.
Yeah. So I can see where globe mallow is.
Yeah. Well, and I like globe mallow because I have had a personal experience with it where I've just been able to witness the resilience of it as a plant, right? So many of our native plants, their root systems are really strong so that if anything on the surface gets destroyed, they'll still come back. And one of my first kind of hobbies or projects for my neighborhood was to do a set of experimental basin gardens where we had no access to irrigation. There was no power source there. And I had this question of like, well, could we build basins where we capture water, allow that water to sink down into the ground and plant native plants there, and could they survive? And this is like on a west facing wall. It gets almost full sun all day, and it's the reflective sun, so it's a very hot location. We were very successful, so I brought a group together. We dug 3 whole like large basins, planted all of it with native plants, and I hand watered those native plants for the first 2 years to get them established.
Okay.
And by the 3rd year, come summer, it was the 3rd year where we had this last year, this incredible heat. I hand watered those twice during the summer, but for the most part, it was hands off. I was like, okay, and go. And they did great. And it was, oh my gosh, it was like, oh my God, this happened and it worked and it was an experiment, but like these native plants are awesome. And I went on vacation for the new year and came back right at the start of 2025 and went on a walk, and I turned the corner to, where my corner basin is, my corner garden is that we built. And I looked and I was like, the globe mallow is supposed to be there. Why is the globe mallow not there? And I looked at the entire garden, and somebody had come and ripped out all of the plants from there. And we don't know why, and I don't know who it was, and
Oh.
So all of these native plants that I had invested.
So you won't know what year 4 was to bring.
Well, so first of all, it was such a devastating moment for me because this was like I had given my heart. I mean, this was my creative expression, right? This was my art right here that I had poured myself into, and I nurtured that from the idea to actual like manifestation, making it real, and then hand watering and all this stuff. So there was like this like real like heart ripped out like feeling of devastation, and just like who would do this, and like the cruelty of life and all the things. But then come around like March, I came and I walked around and I started to see these little green sprouts coming out. Yeah. Right where that globe mallow had been, and right where that Mormon tea had been, and right all of the plants that we had planted and I had nurtured for 3 years. Well, whoever had come and taken out the native plants didn't take out their roots. Oh, and so almost every single one of the plants
did they really
came back.
Fabulous.
And it was like, first of all, so there's like this like intimacy I feel with the globe mallow as this kind of icon of the desert and then of this experience I've had. But it also spoke to me of like, God, our native plants are so resilient. Like, what incredible creatures these guys are. Like, they can handle just the most brutal conditions. They can handle being just like wiped out, and then still come back. And it just gave me like another layer, or maybe another like greater depth of like admiration and appreciation for these plants, So.
Well, that's a great story.
Yeah.
I was sad at first, but I didn't let you. But I was assuming the worst case scenario.
First, it felt like the worst case scenario. It really felt
I
like,
guess.
Yeah. Well, and that's where we get to like have a perspective of the thing that feels like the absolute worst thing could turn into something better than we hope, right? So, yeah.
Desert Love, which you didn't name it Desert Love.
I did not. Desert Love was not my name. Nope, that was Joe.
It's kind of a beautiful name.
It's a beautiful name.
What's it mean to you personally?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I feel like the mission and vision of Desert Love, the native plant nursery, is, and the botanical garden for Joe, is to help people fall in love with the desert And so that's what it means to me, is that, is this love that we bring to this land and the plants that are on it and the animals and the creatures, and this love that we share and that we're hoping to extend. Because when you love something, you want to protect it. When you love something, you want to keep it safe, right? And
just like a child.
Exactly. And so that's what the name of Desert Love, that's what it means to me. Yeah.
Okay, where do you see Desert Love 5 years from now?
I was speaking to a colleague about this, which I think a lot of times an organization's greatest desire is, we want to be the biggest, we want to be the best, we want, everybody in the world to know our names. It's growth. And I was telling him, my desire for Desert Love is to be strong and resilient as a native plant nursery, so that our community has this as a resource for a long time. If in 5 years Desert Love has all of the systems in place that it needs, all of the infrastructure is self-sustainable in terms of knowing where funding is coming from or sales to meet its needs or whatever, and it can just be a strong resource so the community knows this is where I get my native plants. That's what I would love for Desert Love. Yeah.
Okay. And while Vegas is growing, it's still small in a way.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it's definitely one of those things where, like you said, everybody kind of knows everybody, right? There's the
the art people know the art people. Yeah. I'm sure the desert plant people know the desert plant people.
Yeah. We definitely have a strong relationship with Get Outdoors Nevada and have supplied a number of their plants for their native plant gardens. And so, Get Outdoors Nevada is great.
Yeah, and little did I know till the other day that Alan was the founder.
I know. Well, and when I listened to that podcast, I was also surprised by that. So it's amazing.
Yeah, it's a small world, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a small world. Yeah, it really is.
Do you have classes for how to start a native garden?
Yeah.
Or a native yard?
So we are always doing different types of classes. We do have a class coming up on September 6th, so I don't know when this airs, but we have a designer, Michelle Chambliss of Perennial Garden Consultants, who uses a lot of native plants in her designs. She is going to be doing a class on the 6th about how to design with native plants. And we do offer a number of different classes and workshops throughout the year, but just kind of dependent on who our collaborative partners are, or, what's going on kind of that time of year. But we don't have a consistent training program at this point. But, one of the things that we're hoping to really do is, we are really grateful for the people who choose to volunteer with us. We really depend on volunteer support. And our goal is for anybody who volunteers with us to give as much hands-on experience and training with the native plants as possible. And so we try and have our volunteers do almost every part of the process so that they learn, okay, so here's at least how Desert Love seeds their plants. And this is what they do when they're transplanting. And so what we're really hoping to do is to grow that into a more established training program so that we're actually disseminating the information about propagating native plants to the community. Because that is something that we have very little knowledge of, is propagating native plants in a greenhouse environment.
Right.
That is still very experimental. We don't have a lot of people who have that experience in this specific group of plants. So if we can help add to that collective storehouse of knowledge and then help spread that information, I think that only benefits all of us. So.
Oh, yeah, and that's going to have to happen.
Yeah. So our volunteers, we try and to share as much of that information, and hopefully then they can take that too, along with them. So.
Okay, if someone wants to volunteer with you or come out to see your plants, where would they go?
Yeah, so Cactus Joe's, Desert Love is open anytime Cactus Joe's is open. And Cactus Joe's has seasonal hours, so it's good to check online. If they want to see what is going on with Desert Love, they can always just ask somebody at the front desk, like, hey, can I have a tour? And they'll find somebody to do a tour. They can always reach out to me directly. So Kym.m@desertlovelv.org, and my name is spelled Kym. And I would love to schedule a tour. We love showing people the work that we're doing. And then Frank is usually at the nursery every morning except for Sundays. So they could ask, he's the one who's doing most of the growing. They can ask for him.
Are they his babies?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, and what's so funny is like Frank does not have a botanical background. And this to me is like the way I really believe that there are things that like want to be brought to reality, and they find the fastest channel to bring them to earth, right? So Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, has written about this.
Okay.
How ideas are their own energy systems. They're their own beings, and they're looking for the lightning rod, basically. So who is the being who can help bring this idea into reality? And in some ways, I think Frank was that for native plants because his background is in sales. He was a copier salesman. And so the fact that somehow native plants found him and now he is growing, we're about to do our seeding this in September, and we have over 5,400 seeds that we're planning on putting into the soil, and that's all Frank. And he's not a botanist. He didn't grow up doing this. He's not a person who at 6 years old would have said, I'm going to be planting native seeds in a greenhouse for an entire community. Like that was not what
because at 6 years old he was out selling copiers.
He was out selling copiers, right? I'm sure, or newspapers or something, probably, right? So to me, it's just like those are like the mysteries of the universe and the way that it like finds a channel to try and like bring things into reality, and it is often not logical, and it's often not what we would have thought would be the right path, you know?
Yeah.
So.
But here you are.
But here we are. Yeah.
And with those people
that
you didn't know until a couple years ago.
Yeah, and not until, I didn't meet, until a couple of years ago. Yeah.
And this valley could be in for a renaissance of native plants.
Yeah. So can I tell you my greater vision for native plants? So I love the native plant nursery. I love the work that we're doing there. And yet I feel like my vision for native plants extends beyond that. And it goes back to this question of integration. So we kind of started our conversation in that place, right? Where I was in work where I was feeling particularly fragmented in my life. And it was a question of how do I integrate these pieces? How do I feel whole rather than fragmented as I go about my life and my day? And I think that question is continuing itself with the work that I'm doing with the land and the native plants. And it's this question for me of how do we integrate the wild back into our built spaces, right? Like, I love the work that Alan and others are doing in terms of preserving the wild spaces that exist right here. But my question is, like, what if it didn't have to be, here's the wild space and here's the human space? What if it could be, here's the wild space and here's how the wild space continues through the human spaces back into another wild space? And so my greater question, and it really is about the work that I'm doing with my homeowners association, is like, how could we use our landscaping as connective corridors for wilderness so that we're using really smart practices that support the entire ecosystem and support the humans, right? So we have our tree canopies, which cool our cities. And then under the tree canopy, we have our other layers, which replicate a forest, even a desert forest, right? So we have our shrub layers or our ground cover layers. And all of this can kind of spread throughout the entire valley. And what we do is we create corridors for our insect and animal populations, and we live together, humans and insects and animals and wild, nature, we all live together in this like commingled space. And so this is like a living question for me, is like, how is that possible? How is it possible? How could we do it?
Well, it's much like, because you brought up Alan again here, it's much less Aviquame was the connector that connected these other wild places.
Right, yes.
And so you're looking at Las Vegas is now a connector.
Yes,
or you're getting smaller. Your community is now a connector.
Yeah.
To that space right behind your house.
Well, and it's part of what, I think for me, like Alex and I share this vision because he's described it as pockets of the Mojave, right? How can we create more pockets of the Mojave throughout our cities? And it's the same thing, because what he's thinking birds. Okay, if we can have pockets not Alex. If we can have pockets of the Mojave throughout the city, well, then we have these places where the birds can have their habitats as they're migrating through, right? It's a similar concept for me. And, I've been in conversation with Julie Coop of the Nevada Monarch Society and Marigan DeVito of Xerces Society, learning a lot about butterflies, but specifically monarchs. So you did want to have a conversation about monarchs.
Yes, I did.
I would love to have
You're
that
just
conversation.
not the person I thought I was going to have that conversation with.
That's right. But I'm going to share.
God bless the Kym from Chattanooga.
For inspiring this part of the conversation. Well, what's been really interesting is as I've been in conversation with Julie and Marigan, and Marigan did a presentation at Mojave Bloom, which
She was a guest too, by the way.
Was she? She's wonderful. So you already know Marigan. She is incredible. Her wealth of knowledge around insects, to me, like, I have always felt relatively indifferent about insects, but it's because of my conversations with her that I am starting to feel towards insects the ways that I feel towards the native plants, which are like, oh my God, these guys are incredible and they're so smart and they're so intelligent, and like, why are we not trying to protect all of these, right? And so I love Marigan. She's great. Anyway, Marigan and Julie have been really sharing a lot of information about our monarch population, and it is part of this kind of ongoing question for me of integration. And so one of the things that we know right now is that our monarch population is about 5% of what it should be. So we probably should have about 5 million monarchs that would be, a thriving population that we probably had, 200 years ago. And we, at last count in 2024, counted, this is our Western monarchs, about 230,000. So we're at 230,000 monarchs where we should have 5 million. Marigan and Julie, if you have them on the show again or whatever, can go through all of the reasons why the monarchs are declining, and it's the same reason that the desert tortoises are declining.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same stuff everywhere, right? But one of the thoughts here is like, well, the milkweed stands, these groves of milkweeds that the monarchs have depended on, they're gone, they're decimated. Well, what if neighborhoods everywhere used rush milkweed, which is one of our native milkweeds here, used rush milkweed as a common landscape plant and landscaped with rush milkweed throughout their entire, neighborhood property, just because it has these beautiful butter yellow flowers. It's kind of this evergreen plant. It has kind of a succulent look, but like unlike other milkweeds, it doesn't die back in the wintertime. So you have an evergreen milkweed that kind of looks like a succulent with its kind of long stems, long green stems, and it has a really cool structure to it. So it's really like, it's a cool plant to place in areas where you want some more architecture and some more texture. Anyway, what if our neighborhood started to actually just use that the way that they use lantana, right? Like, we put lantana everywhere. We put oleander everywhere. It goes everywhere, and yet it doesn't actually serve. Lantana and oleander don't have these additional functions to help our wildlife. What if we started to do, like with rush milkweed, what we're doing with those plants, and everybody is just putting rush milkweed everywhere? Well, then now we've created an entire city where our 230,000 monarchs now have milkweeds everywhere that they can be laying their eggs on, right? And if we can start to think about this on like a systemic level and start to get people on board where they're excited and like, oh yeah, that's just common, that's just obvious, of course we're doing this.
Yeah.
Then we're supporting our non-human neighbors in like really important ways that actually, like, we're just adding beauty to our landscape. It doesn't hurt us.
What's the roadblock?
People don't know about people don't know about these plants, and people have not had access to these plants. So that's the roadblock is people don't know and they haven't had access. And so Desert Love is trying to be the access point. And there are a lot of, there are other places where you can find native plants, like the Nevada Department of Agriculture and Forestry out of Floydland Park. They are open a couple days a week. They sell native plants from there. You can find some native plants there.
The new neighborhoods seem to be the low-hanging fruit for you.
Yeah. Well, and so then that's like a really good question is like, how do I connect? I think those are developers, right? So the developers put in the new neighborhoods, and they are the ones who make the decision.
And they order a bunch of oleanders.
Yeah, and they order a bunch of...
Because that's just what...
Or like
they do.
What has happened, this is Alex's neighborhood in Cadence. They have put in native plants. So we see a number of penstemons and brittle bushes there and globe mallows. But the landscapers don't know what to do with those. And so they're pruning them in the same way as...
Okay, yeah, it's still the same landscapers.
Right. Or they're spraying a bunch of pesticides on them, right? And so even if you are putting in a native plant, but you're pruning off their flower or spraying a bunch of pesticides, well, we're still not solving the problem of supporting like our insect and animal population. So you're right. I mean, there's like awareness and education, like that has to be part of it. There has to be like a knowing where you can get these plants that you can get them, but a desire to do so as well.
But the education has to go all the way from top to bottom.
Yeah.
And when I say top, I mean the planters. When I say bottom, I mean the people who are the landscapers,
right.
who are doing the pruning.
Right. So
not that they're bottom, maybe they're really top, but you know what I mean. So planning all the way.
Right. So how do I do that?
Well, you got people who should be able to answer you from 75 countries. Maybe the answer will come from Nepal.
I love that.
Somebody from Nepal will say, hey, Kym.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's cool.
Oh, that's great. You're so inspired about this, too.
Oh, I am inspired about this.
But it sounds simple, doesn't it?
Well, and I think...
No, it sounds like common sense.
It does sound like common sense.
But it's not going to be simple.
Yeah, and yet I think, there's this part of me that's like, I can look at, and we all can, look at the big picture and feel like so discouraged, like, oh my God, we're never going to get there, Or I can look at it and be like, well, I have a really small circle of influence. I can do this in my neighborhood. I'm on all 3 of my boards right now. I can do this in my neighborhood. We can start to do this in a way where we can be an example or a model for others, and maybe another neighborhood will want to do it too, or another homeowner, right? And maybe what happens is it becomes like a snowball effect. I don't know.
Well, you're in with a group of people who have a lot of connections.
Yeah. Well, and this is another part of it too. This is actually I was really inspired by Alan's story of, how the whole process of getting this to be a national monument of Equime was that there was the reaching out to as many different people as possible to create this feeling of like, we're going to do this together. This is collaborative. We're all on board together. It's supporting all of us. I do think that there is a shift that has to happen, and I see happening actually with an example of like the Desert Reciprocity Network, right? Bringing a bunch of people together in collaboration, where we start to shift our mindset around like, you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing. If, we overlap, then we fight with each other and we compete and I sue you or I try and steal your customers or whatever, into a mindset of like, we all have to work together, and there's like so much joy that can happen and so much like more abundance of ideas and connections and all the things when we are working in collaboration rather than in competition.
And I was excited with that because it seemed like that's what everybody wanted to do.
I agree.
More than any other group. I mean, besides the Aviquame
Yeah.
thing, but with Kym going and knocking on every door. So
Yeah. Yeah. You ask about like long-term goals for desert love, and this is an ongoing question for me too, which is like, how could we use the nursery to support our threatened and endangered species, right? And I don't know, there's so many gray areas around that, but like, for example, Joe has 2 very large blue diamond cholla that grow on his property at Cactus Joe's. Blue diamond cholla is an extremely endangered species.
And is it just for the blue diamond area there?
Yeah, it's
is
just
it
for
endemic?
It's endemic to the blue diamond area.
Really?
Correct. Yes.
Oh.
In fact, he thinks he has the largest blue diamond cholla. I mean, nobody's gone out and measured and kept track of this.
I've probably seen it before, but
You may have, but it's growing inside of one of his creosote bushes, and he thinks that's why it's been able to stay so
really?
large, is
Oh.
because the creosote holds up. Because, cholla, that's part of their evolution, is that their branches break off, right? And then they get carried by an animal or whatever, and that's how they reproduce themselves. So the fact that there's this blue diamond cholla growing inside of a creosote kind of protects it from those little segments being broken off. Anyway, so he has 2 very large blue diamond chollas growing on his property that we can easily just take segments off and propagate from those segments. And so it's a question for me of like that as an example, like how could we use something like that to support this population that is severely threatened? Like does it, I would love your opinion on this. Like, does it support a population to allow a backyard gardener to grow a blue diamond cholla in their backyard, right? Like, is that supporting the population? Is that helping the population?
plant that in your yard, it's still a blue diamond. The DNA doesn't change, does it?
Right. And so whatever insects or animals were potentially using that could potentially still use that if they were able to find it. So, and it's things like if we were able to propagate the Mojave bear poppy, which I understand is actually very difficult to propagate, like it, has millions of seeds in any given plant and maybe a couple of them germinate. This is just in the wild naturally, which could probably be why it is having such a hard time anyway. It just doesn't germinate very easily. But if we could, and if we could share that with people and they could grow the bear poppy, the Mojave poppy in their yards.
Is the Mojave the same as the California bear poppy?
No, they're different. They're different. And there's a Mojave bee that is connected to the Mojave poppy, and only the Mojave bee will pollinate the Mojave poppy, and the Mojave bee depends on the Mojave poppy. So, you lose one, you lose the other.
Oh,
and so
I didn't know this.
I know. And so then that's like another question. Like if we could propagate and have the Mojave poppy, and we could have just like backyard gardeners or landscapes with the Mojave poppy, does that then support? This is my question of integration, right? Like if we can't go out and fully save the Mojave poppy population in the wild, is there something that we could be doing in the city that supports it within our reach? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm curious about it. It's another part of like the evolution of desert love. Like what if desert love could have some of these species that are really threatened? Is there a way that the work that we do could support them by propagating them and then sharing them with the public? I don't know. I'm curious about it. So one of the things that I had shared at this Desert Reciprocity gathering, which is kind of a personal project, so if this can be considered in my art, is that in November 15th and 16th, I am organizing an event called Stewards of the Earth. And it is basically to bring as many people together around this question of what does it mean to be a good steward of the earth? What does it mean to be in right relationship with the earth and each other? And to have that be kind of like a dialogue that is going on among a very large group of people from all different backgrounds. We will have like nonprofit organizations who are doing a lot of environmental work, but we're also going to be having people who sell products that are either made with sustainable methods or that are upcycling, taking waste and repurposing it into something functional. We are going to have a mini farmers market from our our local growers who are growing produce with organic and sustainable and regenerative processes. We are going to have a number of kind of backyard gardening organizations focusing on the idea of food sovereignty. So, how can we kind of take control over our own food systems and not be so vulnerable to kind of the outsourcing that happens with our food systems. We're going to be doing a bunch of different workshops. We'll have practices in gift economies where people who, like, for example, a vendor who will be upcycling something, let's say they upcycle wine corks or they upcycle used flowers, people can bring those things to the vendors and give of their own abundance. That Alex was bringing from the service berry, which is this idea that the nature of the earth, of the land, of nature itself is that of abundance, but the relationship of abundance is reciprocity, right? And what happens is that when we enter into a relationship that's extractive, I'm going to take what's mine, I want this, I feel like I deserve it, so I'm just going to have it. We create scarcity and we create competition and we create the types of conditions of suffering that we see everywhere. And so what does it mean for humanity to start to think differently towards this relationship of reciprocity with each other and with the land? And so Stewards of the Earth is going to be kind of like an in-person practice and conversation around these ideas, trying to bring as many different segments of the community together around that conversation as possible.
And when is that again?
November 15th and 16th. So
Okay.
It's a Saturday and a Sunday.
What's inspired you recently?
So my cousin gave me this book. It's called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. The book is about our relationship with grief and basically starting an apprenticeship with grief. And the ways, he kind of outlines the 5 different ways that we all experience grief in our lives. One of the gates of grief he describes as, our personal losses that happen to us. We lose someone we love, or we lose a job or whatever. But one of the griefs, an additional gate of grief that he describes is, and this is by Francis Weller, is the collective grief that we all share that we may not even realize. And it's the collective grief of land being devastated, or hearing on the news about some really horrific thing, a mass shooting or whatever, that we often don't realize that we share these griefs on a collective level, and that it's only when we allow ourselves to feel the grief fully and actually go into ceremony with other people. He argues that grief is meant to be shared, and that as a culture we have pushed grief to the edges of our psyche, and that we feel shame around grief. So it's something that we don't give ourselves enough time to fully process. We don't share our grief typically. We feel like it's something that we're supposed to shoulder by ourselves. And what ends up happening is that by pushing grief to the edges of our lives, it shows up. It doesn't go away. It shows up in distorted or dysfunctional or sideways ways within us, right? Which can manifest in PTSD. It can manifest in chronic depression. It can manifest in addiction. It can manifest in having really conflict-laden relationships with people. There are just lots of ways that it shows up if we don't process our grief fully, and often in community. So I've been really inspired by this because it is putting language and framework to something that I have felt kind of like an undercurrent, right? Like an undercurrent of my life, the grief, my own personal grief that I have experienced, but then like collective grief. And there are, 3 other gates that he talks about as well, like our inherited grief, the grief that we inherit from our ancestors, whether it's genetic or simply through like what our parents have passed on to us from their own experiences.
Or what our nation's passed on to us.
Or what our nation has passed on to us. Yes, exactly. And I think what's inspiring to me is this idea of like, this is almost part of Stewards of the Earth too, is like, what would it look like if we like came together and like grieved together, you know? Like what would like a collective grief ceremony look like where we all actually say like I am angry and I am sad and I like have this like really deep like sorrow for these things that are happening to the earth and to my brothers and my sisters and myself, and I just want to like feel it and share it and express it, and like what would happen if did that, you know? And so the wild edge of sorrow is, I think, what is inspiring me right now. Probably not what you were expecting.
This has been really good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Steve, you were this is my first time being on a podcast, and I really appreciate
This
you.
is my first time too.
Oh, yeah, right.
I appreciate you coming all the way down here and what you're doing and what you're going to do.
Thank you. And thank you for this invitation. I'm grateful.
Broadcasting from the Mesquite Works Steam Center in the scenic Mojave Desert, the Art Box sponsors thank you for listening. You can find us on Spotify, Samsung, iHeartRadio, Podchaser, and Amazon Music. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We are on Facebook and Instagram as The Art Box. We welcome all comments. You can email us at artboxvv@gmail.com. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of its hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of our sponsors.
Then I see the way you